The procedure.
5 for order. Good afternoon and welcome to the Environmental Audit Committee, where we have a one-off oral evidence session today into electronic waste. This was a subject which the committee considered in 2020, and there has been an opportunity for the government to take action since then, and we'd like to understand how that is going and get a sense from our witnesses of what more needs to be done. Now, I would just like to start the session by referring to a letter that was published yesterday that I wrote to the largest retailer of electronic goods, which is Amazon, inviting them to appear before us today. They did provide, provided last time, written evidence and appeared before us, I recall, and they have said they will provide written evidence to this session today, but they've declined to appear in person, which I find peculiar, which is why I wrote to them and published that letter. They do make considerable play of their sustainability of their electronic goods business, and I thought they ought to be in a position to come and explain to us in person, but they've declined to do so. So, for those who are here, it would be very helpful if you could just start by introducing yourselves and what your roles are in the organisations you represent. I think we'll start with Chris Chandler.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Chris Chandler. I represent the National Association of Waste Disposal Officers, which is representing sort of local authorities who have the statutory waste disposal function. So we get rid of people's waste.
Thank you. And Katy Medlock.
Katy Medlock, General Manager for the UK of Backmarket. We're the world's largest online marketplace for refurbished devices. So we're a circular economy player. We've around 10 million customers worldwide and have raised about $1 billion to fight e-waste in the globally, but entered the UK market in 2020.
Thank you. And Andrew Mullen, welcome back. You gave evidence to us last time. So.
I did, the same day as Amazon, actually. But, so Andrew Mullen, I'm employed by Beko as a Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs Specialist. Beko is a large domestic appliance manufacturer. I'm also a non-executive director of REPIC, which is a member-owned not-for-profit WEEE compliance scheme. And I chair the JTA, the Joint Trades Association, which is 11 trade associations whose members are affected by the WEEE regulations.
Thank you. And Sam Mountain.
Sam Mountain, the director of iWaste. We specialise in the collection and treatment of waste electronics, specifically for businesses across the UK.
Great, thank you. So I'd just like to start by asking some, but perhaps not all of you, to give me an overview of what are the main challenges affecting the waste industry for electronics and electrical products, and what are the good things that have happened since 2020, and what are the things that have not happened that should have happened since 2020. I think I'd start with you, Andrew.
Thank you. So let's start with the positives. So I think, I work in an industry and work alongside other industries that are committed to dealing with electrical waste. So there is, I can't speak for every manufacturer, but in terms of the work we do a huge amount of work on taking recycled materials and reusing them. There is a lot of work that goes on in terms of, certainly within REPIC, which is the largest WEEE compliance scheme, making sure that we collect WEEE and process it to a high quality, working with the recyclers who do that. We are considerably, as an industry, we're now considerably more focused on promoting, firstly, repair of products, but secondly, the durability of products. I think in terms of negatives, I think there are still too many compliance schemes that, rather than being involved in the physical collection and processing of waste, simply trade evidence. That's not how the WEEE obligations were envisaged. It was supposed to be something that people actively participated in. Trading evidence wasn't really what it was about. And there is too much WEEE that we don't get control of. There's too much WEEE that disappears into the grey market. So most washing machines, for example, left outside people's houses generally get picked up by a scrap metal dealer rather than going through the WEEE system, and that gets lost. And there's no control over the processing of that WEEE.
That because consumers are charged to take their white goods to recycling centres, and if
Not-
they get paid by a scrap metal dealer?
No, the scrap metal dealers, as far as I'm aware, very rarely pay for them. They simply drive round and collect them. Now, people can take them to a civic community site for free. If it's bulky waste collection, I'm sure Chris will have a view on this. My understanding is they're generally asked to leave it outside their house, at which point the local authority will come and pick it up at some point. And if it's something where there is value in the steel, then it will disappear before then.
Chris, are you seeing an increase, are your members seeing an increase in white goods being left for household collection?
There is sort of bulky collection services that local authorities offer. It is a charged for service, and generally they have to be left outside the house for collection. I'm not sure about the scrap man thing. I guess it depends on if it's a very urban environment, then probably. But if it's rural, not non-urban areas, it's unlikely to be picked up. At the minute, the public have the choice of either taking it to a recycling centre or bulky collection.
In Shropshire, there's a current consultation going on about household recycling centres, and there's a potential closure of 2 out of the 5 centres.
Yeah, that is a threat at the minute.
Are you seeing that more often in other local authorities as a result of pressures on authority finances?
Several consultations going on. Several authorities are consulting on closing sites or restricting opening hours, restricting access through booking systems and that sort of thing. So it's unfortunately it's a sort of a result of continual budget cuts.
Have you actually seen any close yet, or is it all consultation stage at this point?
I haven't seen any close recently. We have closed, in my local authority, we closed 2 sort of about a decade ago.
Recently. Are you seeing an increase, are your members seeing an increase in collection of electronic waste through recycling centres? Is volumes going up, or is it, what's the picture? Is it static?
I haven't got that figure to hand, but I am aware that the big challenge from our point of view is this. There's a figure done, a study done by Material Focus. Scott is in the room for later, but it's showing that there's 155,000 tonnes of WEEE, small WEEE, in people's bins, and that WEEE in the bin goes either to landfill or for incineration. It's costing local authorities around about £20-25 million a year just to get rid of it. It then goes out of the circular economy, and should it be for councils and taxpayers to be paying for that rather than producers with the producer responsibility legislation? So it's a big number, and that's the challenge, is to try and get that WEEE that's convenient to put in your bin back and into the WEEE system proper.
So that might lead us on to Katy. Are you seeing, how's the recycling going of these items? If there's, do you recognise Chris's figure of 155,000 tonnes in the black bins?
Certainly I think what you're seeing in the UK is a real awareness of alternatives. We have a lot of conversations about recycling, but I think UK consumers are becoming increasingly aware of what can be done further up the chain, and that's where refurbishment as a viable alternative really steps in. And UK is a really forward-thinking market from consumers in that perspective, which is great because it's also one of the second highest producers of e-waste per capita in globally as well. So from a refurbishment perspective, you've seen the likes of Back Market come in and actually offer a commercially viable alternative to recycling. And we've done research that shows that the average Brit has got £4,000 worth of tech sitting in their top drawer. So we're offering a way to refurbish that and put it back part into the circular economy. And
is that the second-hand value of this equipment?
Exactly. It's second-hand value, so it's extremely valuable that we're sort of the step before we talk about the recycling target, so that reuse refurbishment not only has commercial value but huge environmental value as well.
How do consumers become aware of this value? What are you doing to try to encourage them to make it available?
As a company, that's sort of our reason for existing, and when we're continually advertising and marketing and doing public relations activities to make sure that people are aware of this as a viable alternative. And it's extremely important because obviously with 2 million tonnes of e-waste being produced each year, it's not possible that we would be able to cope and make sure that is responsibly being recycled with that kind of volume, which is where the refurbishment industry steps in. I think in terms of what has happened, going back to your original question, what has happened that is positive is consumer awareness around that, and the likes of Back Market, as an example, has grown to the same size as our German market in nearly a third of the time that it's been open. So the UK is responding to this really well. But a lot of the regulations that are in place here refer to big, large, bulky goods, televisions, washing machines, etc. And I think the next step would be quite clearly to expand that to the smaller devices and to expand the right to repair movement and regulations around smaller devices.
So could you just give us a sense of the scale of the marketplace then that you've just referred to? The UK is now the same size as Germany.
Yeah, of course. So I'm trying to think what would be the best way to paint the scale of it, but we had 10 million customers globally, and the UK is frequently one of our second or third biggest markets, so you can estimate that we'd be 1 to 1.5 million customers in the UK that are already actively engaging with refurbishment.
I'll bring Chris in a second. Are these one-off customers? So if I change my mobile phone and provide it to you, I'm a customer for a year?
No, we have both one-off, and obviously the UK, we've been only open for 3 years in this market, so it's new. But for sure, where we have a longer standing is a lot of repeat customers trading in 1, 2, 3 devices. And I think the reason why I sort of stress that your mobile phone is an important device for these right to repair regulations to get expanded into is exactly what you've touched on. You know, the average UK consumer is replacing their phone on a contract every 2 years. So there's, 1, a lot of these devices in circulation. 2, they're extremely valuable because now everybody needs one. But also, number 3 reason for this is that they're actually, while such a tiny piece of equipment, extremely damaging to the environment to produce. And a lot of that damage is happening in the manufacturing stage. So, for example, an ADEME, which is the French Ministry for the Environment equivalent, shows that a phone, if made refurbished, is using 91% less raw materials and produces 89% less e-waste. And yet this is something that is currently not included in the regulations.
Okay, and Chris, you want to come?
I was just going to ask, you talk about the smaller devices. If you go to a recycling centre now, you will find a large skip full of small devices. Now, televisions, for example, are separated these days. But of that mountain of small devices, what route is there, if at all, to get those devices into the world you operate in? And what proportion of what is supposed to be a WEEE recycling bin actually ends up being recycled? Because my sense is a lot of this is just not going anywhere near the recycling industry at the moment. It's just being dumped or incinerated.
I think, Sam, you're fairly well placed to answer that, but before I pass on, what we're trying to do is intervene before it gets to that point, because at that point it's already in a recycling piece. Its chances are during collection it's been damaged, it's become even further away from being usable or being repairable. So what the reuse refurbish industry is doing is stepping in before that point and providing a commercially viable and attractive solution before that point.
Therefore, is it not sensible to have a route or at the recycling centre, which is just dumping them in a big skip?
Oh, absolutely.
The skip at the recycling centre, they are provided by the producer compliance schemes. So the WEEE producer compliance schemes provide the skip, haul that material off, and then they have to go through the treatment process that's all sort of audited and stuff. So that the stuff in the skip is recycled, but it's not reused.
That's categories. Sorry, Chris. That's categories 2 to 9 within the WEEE regulations, and there is a small mixed WEEE target. So, in its entirety, that's what the target is set on. and there are protocols that were set some years ago which split out what's in each of those categories 2 to 9.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to bring in Sam, because he hasn't had a chance to say anything yet. Sam, do you want to go back to my original question?
I do. I think with regards to scope, there's so many elements with regards to waste electronics that it's difficult to encompass everything into one. You know, we can go, you've got a drawer full of phones, you've got a cupboard full of old printers and things like that. So I think the messaging that comes down to the top and what we see probably at the bottom of the chain is, you know, I went on East Hants website, which is my local council. How do I recycle a printer? Takes me 2 to 3 or 5 different links. I then go to Hants Council, which is our local council. They have a doorstep collection service. I think the messaging across the board is quite mixed and varied and not uniform. You know, we want to take these products out of the waste element so they can be reused and repurposed before they even touch the skips or go to the council sites, because the issue with those is then the sensitivity of what's on those devices. You know, my phone, banking, all my socials, everything is contained within that device, and if not handled correctly, it can be used, but it can be picked up by anyone. You know, anyone can go into, you know, a container that's placed at a local authority site and pull a mobile phone out and tablet, and there's a lot of just misinformation, misdirection. I think, as you know, we live in a throwaway society, so, you know, last year's phone is obsolete to some people, so it's making sure if we're refurbing them, where they're going, you know, not putting information out that says phones are great, but a 5-year-old phone has got no value. You know, you can throw it on eBay and it ends up being bought by someone in another country and shipped abroad, and it just becomes someone else's problem. So,
are there any specific barriers that you would like to draw to our attention that could be removed with the right action, which would improve either reuse or and recycling, or just take them out of the waste stream altogether?
I think, you know, trying to get the public engaged or provide the public a really easy, convenient service for them to be able to hand over their small WEEE. You know, so I know that the regs that have been proposed are looking at providing curbside collections, and that would provide a really easy, convenient service for everybody, and save them putting that item, instead of in their WEEE bin, they'll put it in their recycling bin for collection. Very simple, very straightforward, very convenient.
And feasible with the curbside collection complexity with food waste coming in 3 years' time?
I mean, the regs as they're proposed looks to try and partner the WEEE producers or the WEEE administrator with local councils, if they can have that ability to work together. So, I mean, a lot of councils, or some councils, are providing WEEE collection at the minute, but some can't because there's not enough space on lorries and that sort of thing. But with a bit of help from the WEEE schemes in terms of adding cages or other sort of assistance, they could work together. But even if it's physically impossible for that collection round to take WEEE, the regulations are proposing that the WEEE administrator finds a different route to do that. So, you know, it could be, I don't know, you know, there's lots of postal couriers and other commercial groups, you know, that could collect WEEE if necessary. But probably the best way is for them to work together with councils.
I think, can I make a point? So I think there is, you know, from our position, we have vehicles on the road, we have drivers that can provide doorstep collection service. In the past, we used to provide a local doorstep collection service for in and around sort of Aldershot, Basingstoke, within sort of a 30-mile radius, and that produced quite great results. However, there was just no incentivise from the councils, you know, from the producers, from the compliance schemes. You know, when the value of what comes down to us, there's no real value in the raw material. The evidence value that we get as well just doesn't sustain the funding. So for iWaste example, just on the doorstep of Reading, you know, we have the ability to provide a doorstep collection to people, but there's just no incentive for the councils, and the councils either don't have the funding or want to get involved. You know, there's red tape around that. So I think if you had companies like iWaste around the country that had the ability to provide doorstep collections, you know, the facilities are there. It's just being able to help fund it and where that funding comes from.
What Chris is saying is that if councils are obliged to do some kind of collection service, then that would be creating value, because as you've several have been pointing out, these are high value items, more so than other material collected at curbside.
I think the regulations as they're proposed puts that onus on the WEEE producers to provide that service. So effectively you would get a countrywide doorstep collection service, not funded by local authorities but funded by the producers, and the producers can go and implement that how they see fit.
If I might just add to that from a producer perspective, I agree. It's about consumer attitude. There is certainly concern amongst producers that rather than any gains from curbside collection will actually be fairly small compared to what will just effectively shift the WEEE that's currently collected at places like civic community sites or local electrical retailers into curbside. There's certainly a risk that what we won't collect in curbside is the high value products, the phones, the tablets, the laptop computers, because people will be worried about data theft, and I think that's a very real concern. I suspect you probably agree with that. And in terms of producers paying for it, at the end of all this, the consumer will pay for it. It won't be the producers won't generate enough profit to cover that. It will be the consumer.
Remy.
Thanks very much. I'm just interested in trying to get a view as to what's happened since 2018 with the publication of the government's resources and waste strategy. I was just looking at the data in our brief. It says that in 2015, in Q1 2015, 127.74 thousand tonnes of e-waste was produced, compared to Q3 last year, which was 114 tonnes. So that's modest grounds for encouragement, would you agree? Or do you think there are other factors which have led to that reduction in production of e-waste?
I think that depends on what you mean by production of e-waste. As manufacturers, we don't produce e-waste, we produce we produce electrical equipment.
That's true, isn't it?
Waste is what comes off the market as a result of that. And actually, collection levels have been pretty static across the years, although the markets have grown. Where we stand at the moment, actually, in terms of the biggest products which affect the WEEE collections, which tend to be the products I'm involved with, the washing machines, fridge freezers, dishwashers, those types of product, the market's pretty static. In fact, it's a little bit down at the moment. We saw
the opposite message. So the market itself has increased. So there's more kit out there.
Yeah.
But the collection rate is static. Therefore, the percentage that's being collected, recycling, has actually reduced.
As I said, sales actually are down at the moment. So the market generally sits somewhere between 10 and 11 million units a year. It's currently around about 8.5 million units a year. But there is a huge amount of product traded on places like eBay. I had a look yesterday. For our washing machines, there's currently over 3,000 used washing machines of our brand available on eBay. And there is no correlation between E placed on the market and WEEE coming off the market. And one of the reasons for that is products change. So if it's a 15-year-old fridge freezer coming off the market, it's being replaced by a new fridge freezer. That new fridge freezer is probably a much bigger product. It's far more likely to be, for example, an American side-by-side fridge freezer as opposed to a two-door combi fridge freezer. So TVs are another example where TVs going onto the market tend to be much bigger than TVs coming off the market. So there is no direct correlation. And I think one of the things we as producers would actually rather see WEEE measured in is in terms of units, because it's much easier to do a comparison of units placed on the market against units coming off the market.
A lot of slightly off topic, but I'm interested in your answer, which was there is a huge reuse market in eBay and free cycle. We use a lot at home. The consumer is doing a lot of this work for you without government intervention because they're following the money, and that's how markets work and should be encouraged, shouldn't it?
I think that's absolutely what's happening. If a consumer sees value in the product they have, then they don't just take it to the local civic community site. They give it to friends, they give it to neighbours, they sell it on eBay, they gift it to a charity. There are charities out there who get more electrical products than they know what to do with.
And where we effectively come in is when that stops working. So it's obsolete and it doesn't have an obvious commercial value to another consumer.
I think there's a lot we can do to make that pathway to repair more viable as well. So, for example, what you're saying actually makes sense when the product is working, and there's a lot of e-waste going into collection that is working, and that should be prevented. But when these instances where it's not working, what we're also sort of asking for change for is that the barriers that are placed to repair are quite easy to be able to remove. So two of those, for example, is the availability of parts. Yep. And often when they are produced by the original producer of that electronic waste, there are things that can be done to make them less available, more expensive, and difficult to obtain, which means that there's sort of a planned obsolescence in that cycle.
Is that still the case? Because we've been talking about this for a while.
It is still the case, and what you're also seeing happening at the moment is not just parts hardware, but software changes that are being introduced. So,
manufacturers who are designing in complexity and repair, obsolescence, does anyone name and shame? Is there any movement to force a more responsible approach?
So that we're all clear on sort of an example here, I can give an example of what's happening live in market at the moment. Back Market has done a lot of research to understand why consumers might have a barrier to purchasing refurbished rather than purchasing new. And let's take the smartphone example. Part of the research showed here that one of the fears was around battery life. That's everybody has the dead fear of your phone running out of battery. So we've placed more focus, I guess, on talking about new battery replacement in the phones that we sell. A challenge that we have is that some original producers are now putting out software updates that, unless it's a genuine part from that producer, you're receiving an error message to say that this has got a non-compatible part, an error message to say that we can't show you the battery health of this product anymore because it's not a compatible part. The compatible original part is extremely expensive. It makes repair completely difficult and prohibitive and no longer attractive for the customer. Whereas these parts that do exist are perfectly safe, they're tested, they're perfectly compatible, they work really well, they have the same durability. But because the producer is the person controlling that software update, they have the strength there to be able to prevent that. And this is why the right to repair needs to be considered, and why we need to extend it particularly to small devices where the software updates are regular, and it's a much more commercial question, I would say.
So, going back on track, the impact on your businesses since 2018 of the government's strategy, has there been any? I'm starting with you, Andrew, because you're a producer.
Well, I think as right to repair was mentioned, for a business like ours, and actually for most branded businesses, it made no difference at all, because all it required us to do was things that we were already doing. So, if to pick up on some of the points that were just made, in terms of difficulty to repair, we repair 200,000 products a year. If we can do it, they're not hard to repair. Our engineers will be in and out of the customer's house in 45 minutes to repair their washing machine or fridge. So, they don't suddenly become hard to repair once they're out of warranty. In terms of spare parts, we've got over 300,000 spare parts in stock across 42,000 different
Okay, so that's
lines.
The advert for Peake, but about the industry more widely. Perhaps, Chris, you can. That you've got.
Well, from local authorities' point of view, since 2018, I think WEEE's just been steady. The low-hanging fruit has been easily harvested, but it's this figure. I keep going back to 155,000 tonnes of WEEE still in the bins that are going for disposal. So that is our challenge. But I think now that DEFRA have pushed out this the proposals for the WEEE regs reform. If they see that through, it's going the right way. It will certainly help dramatically get that WEEE back into the right place.
I just want to get a flavour for the portion of e-waste that's going via your guys.
Yeah.
It's coming out of the bins, and how much of it is being recycled or reused. You've talked about 155,000 tonnes per annum.
Yeah, that's
right. And then I was using data for a quarter, wasn't I? It was about 120,000 tonnes per quarter. Do those figures feel about right to you? I mean, this is your area.
I think from our perspective, I think when you waste getting lost in the industry and you find the numbers, I always find, we work with the compliance schemes, we work with local councils, but it's so easy to obtain a licence as well to collect waste electronics. The missing numbers, we report to the compliance schemes, so there's thousands of smaller versions of us that are collecting waste electronics that go through the recycling system. But
we actually collectively just not know how much is being repurposed by the producers, the take-back schemes. Do we not know what that number is?
Certainly on our side, it's nearly impossible to quantify.
I think if you're talking about the products that are collected in civic community sites in skips, or you're talking about stuff that might be collected via curbside, which will probably go through a very similar route, what will happen is that will go to a WEEE treatment plant, a recycling centre, and it will get tipped into a crusher. But quite often with the small mixed WEEE, by the time it's gone to that point, it's not salvageable anyway.
How can we tell whether the government's policies are a success or not if we don't measure what the take-up has been? Do we know?
No.
No one knows.
I think that's probably a fair assessment.
That's great. Okay. In which case, it's quite hard to answer the next question. Is there currently sufficient economic incentive for businesses to get involved in this sector? Well, the answer is we don't know, because we could have 100% effective collection, I doubt it, or we could have almost none, because you just don't know the numbers.
I think the truth is the stuff that's worth saving can be reused, go through a reuse system, gets pulled out before it gets into the WEEE system. It's never counted as WEEE. It's gone to a charity shop, or it's been given to a neighbour, or it's been sold on eBay or Facebook Marketplace. It's never entered the WEEE system, and that's why we can't measure it. It's because it's not there for us to count. It's a peer-to-peer market, which we just have no access to.
Which is the most effective natural part of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it'll be
working.
Yeah.
It'll be that
market.
It'll be that low-value product that the old manky electric toothbrush or whatever that no one wants to reuse.
Well, the printer that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, it's worth less than £10 or whatever. That will go typically in the wheelie bin. So that's the stuff that can be measured via surveys and that sort of thing. But that sort of small item is this making up this 155,000 tonne year
figure. Let's take
figure.
that as an example. So we're talking about, this is my final question, the printer, the obsolete printer, the electric toothbrush, the cabling, all the stuff I've got drawers of, like everyone else by the sounds of it. Are there sufficient economic incentives in the global schemes to find a route that is other than the black bin, those? And if not, what are your thoughts about how that could be improved? Who's going to...
I can.
Yeah, Chris.
I mean, the system at the minute, with the re-regulations, the producers are responsible for that via the producer compliance scheme. So they would go and collect that material at recycling centres. But in terms of the economics, it's always they have a target to meet to collect a certain tonnage. And if they don't meet that target, they have to pay a compliance fee. But often the compliance fee is less than the cost of actually collecting it. So sometimes it's easier just to pay the compliance fee than actually go and do the work in the first place. So it's that balance that needs to be...
Maybe a negative incentive as opposed to a positive incentive. It's needed at that base level. What about on the marketable? I've just had a quick look at your website actually, and it's iPhones and laptops. It's the high value stuff that you're...
Of course, because they're the as you've pointed out, the easiest commercially viable option, yet there's still lots that could be done in terms of the right to repair elements that I mentioned before to make that more commercially viable. And the more commercially viable, the more products, I guess, that is expanded to, the higher chance we have of preventing things from ending up in the skip. So the availability of parts, the software, etc., still has a huge part to play on expanding what we can offer. But Restart, which is a great, fantastic charity around right to repair, have done some great research to show around consumer repairability. So take the printer you have, for example. It's normally around 30% discounting between buy new and cost to repair, where an individual member of the public might decide that is worth it or not. And so often it is cheaper to buy new, rendering that product useless. So repair schemes, repair vouchers, repair indexes are something that have been introduced in other markets that would be really worthwhile to consider in the UK to help that repairability.
Thank you. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much. I wanted to sort of maybe up from that point actually, and focus in particular on the government consultation that's out at the moment. And Katy, I was really struck by something you said about the UK generating, I think, the second highest amount of electrical waste in the world per capita population, which is quite a stunning statistic. And so looking at that government consultation on e-waste, do you think, first of all, that it's broad enough? And do you think that, for example, the lack of focus on the need to reduce the amount of electronics used in the UK in the first place is something that should have been in there and isn't?
I think that's definitely an ask from us, is that so much of the consultation, the regulation, and general speak is always around recycling, which is a hugely important part, but it is also the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, and it is a conversation that we'd like to continually have, to be moving upstream to stop devices, electronics, no matter of their size and scale, getting into that recycling process in the first place, because of these startling stats that we have, whether on a per capita or on an absolute tonnage basis. The UK is not. We will always struggle with recycling of that kind of volume. So I think you're absolutely correct, and that if we could look at how we can prevent so many new electronics being purchased, which again, refurbished, reused electronics is a very viable stream to prevent that, the obsession with the new electronics. So all of the things we've been asking for in this consultation, with the right to repair and talking about reuse targets rather than recycling targets, will help tackle the problem at the source.
So just to completely capture that, so that it's got hopefully a recommendation from our committee in our report. If you're talking about a genuine right to repair, a right to repair as well that is expanded beyond what we have now, what would be your ask that should have been in that government consultation, or that they should take into account in terms of what would make a real difference?
Yeah, two very clear asks from us there is, one, that we have reuse targets, more firm reuse targets, rather than having the conversation only about recycling. And the second is expanding it to small devices, and with that as well, having the original pressure on the original producers to remove the barriers that impede repair. So the software updates that I'd mentioned, and the availability of spare parts, making repair affordable and commercially viable.
I don't know if you wanted to come in on that one.
I don't really echo what Katy said, really. Like I said, from our perspective, we receive hundreds of tons of waste electronics, but very few of those items are salvageable, and even if they are salvageable, you come up with hurdles. We collect laptops and iPads and phones from businesses. A small percentage of them might be able to be data wiped, the rest of it are put through recycling because they could be locked. Businesses have their own incentive. Actually, they don't want to go back onto the marketplace either. So again, that's an education from the top that needs to sort of fall back down.
Anyone else have something they think that the consultation should have covered and hasn't?
It's clearly focused on more recycling, and it is looking at more reuse. Your point about reduction in actual consumption in the first place is an interesting one. It didn't really look at that, but the public love their stuff, and just me, for example, I love a bargain, and you can buy so much electronic stuff for next to no money these days, but it lasts a year and then it breaks and you just buy another one. And
people don't love the fact that they can't repair things. I mean, the amount of frustration you get from people who actually would be perfectly happy to get something repaired if they thought
it's not flooding the market with stuff that's so cheap that it appears to be a great buy and then just lasts 12 months and then breaks. It's that sort of I don't know quite how you would ever stop that.
Ultimately, we live in a throwaway society, don't we? And everyone's after that next thing.
That hasn't happened by accident. It's happened because of price signals. It's happened because of a lack of regulation. And so I'm trying to invite you to be a bit more radical in terms of your proposals on how we might do something about that, rather than just saying, well, it's a throwaway society and what can you do? So you could make, for example, much higher costs for using virgin material. You know, if the government was serious about a circular economy, it wouldn't just be taddling about with this
Exactly.
recycling. It would
You could
overall.
mandate products that last a certain length of time, not just 12 months. But the cost, obviously, that you would have a big cost to the consumer that then would...
If they insisted on buying
Okay.
virgin, but they won't need to because we're going to have this wonderful repaired and refurbished market.
I was going to say, when you talk about, price impact on the virgin materials, that's this group potentially not the best group to discuss how that might be done, as it's quite different from our business models. But subsidising, and in a way that it could be producer pays, but also subsidising on the repair element will make raw materials, virgin materials, comparatively more expensive, and some schemes that exist in other markets. So VAT on repair is a conversation. Repair vouchers have had great success both in Austria and in France to help you get to that 30% level. And in addition, the French repair index that exists showing you how well this item, it's a bit like an ingredients card on a milk bottle or on produced food. This repairability index will actually show you how easy it is for your item to get repaired. And France has had a huge impact there. And I think in their first year of launching that, they had something like 60% consumer awareness of this scheme.
Brilliant.
And so then for me, I would certainly be able to make, as a consumer, more viable choices for the environment if I knew what that was.
Has that been, as far as you're aware, discussed at all within DEFRA or more broadly here?
I'm unsure if it's been it must be with, I look at the Restart's right to repair movement, it's one of the big core 5 asks.
I can say it has been discussed with DEFRA.
What are the reasons, as you understand them, for why it's not gone further?
As in the right to repair?
Well, in particular, the kinds of measures that Katy was just outlining.
Well, look, Katie's covered a number of areas, and I'll try and remember them all and cover off the ones I can. I think the first point in terms of right to repair, and you've mentioned about parts pricing, actually, right to repair doesn't cover parts pricing.
No, it covers the availability of parts, which will have an impact of supply.
It will make them available, it doesn't cover pricing.
And perhaps it could also.
Well, I think, if you're going to start looking at that and making parts available for a set period of time and pricing, then actually you also then have to look at, as a manufacturer, we hold huge numbers of parts we end up throwing away because nobody wants them. So there is an environmental impact in holding spare parts. It's not often talked about, but I think it has to be, at least in the mix. In terms of focus on reuse, I think the problem with focusing on reuse within the WEEE arena is that by the time it's in the WEEE arena, everybody else has had a look and decided that that product has no future. So actually, they're just going through the dregs of what's left. And I think if we look at what goes on your products, I would imagine, have never actually entered the WEEE system. They've gone from consumer to refurbisher, who's refurbished them and they're then selling them. They've never entered the WEEE system.
Often, yeah.
So we talk about how do we...
Sorry, often
no, they haven't.
No, often they haven't. Again, it's upstream, yeah.
So if we want to look at reuse, we have to look at, firstly, things like that, but we also have to look at things like eBay and what goes through charity stores and what gets traded sort of peer-to-peer or what gets given to neighbours. By the time it's got to a recycler, it's probably so beaten up that actually it's really hard for them to refurb. It's not to say they can't, and there's some product they can do, but it's a relatively low percentage just because of the journey it's had. And if it's a problem, again, like a fridge or a washing machine, it's not been protected on that journey. It's been fairly beaten about. So there is a place to look at reuse, but it's perhaps not that. In terms of using more recycled material, again, at the risk of doing another advert for Beko, we're currently working with AO Recycling, taking plastics from their fridge plant and putting them in new fridges. So that's all taking place now, and will grow.
Repairability index, as has happened in France, which just sounds like why would people not be in favour of being given that information? It feels so basic.
I think the repairability index in France has challenges. I understand the theory behind it, but again, it will talk about availability of spare parts, but not how much those spare parts cost. And so actually it's quite an easy system to manipulate should you choose to do so. And actually we have products that are covered by that and we score quite well. and I'm not saying we do manipulate them, we don't, but some manufacturers could, if they choose, score really highly on one part, but actually score really badly on other parts. There's a place for a system like that, but I think the French system is probably not it.
Sorry, we need to move on because it's far more fascinating than one would have imagined, isn't it? Do you think a substantial producer-paid collection scheme will be effective in tackling issues such as costs to local authorities on managing the waste or planned obsolescence? Maybe start with Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think if producers pay for that service, it would be great. As I say, this figure of 155,000 tonnes of waste of WEEE being in the bins. That has a cost to local authorities to get rid of. It's not going through the sort of circular economy, and if producers come along and cover the cost of picking that up, then great.
And the idea of a scheme administrator that's business led, is that the right approach? And what does it? I'd love to know what the implications of that are for local authorities. Does it take waste collection out of the?
It would. The scheme administrator would, I think they're trying to attempt to work with local authorities first, but if they can't, then they will have to go and work with others like, couriers or, Tesco's doing household deliveries or whatever to get this WEEE back. But in terms of, I say it's a cost to local authorities to get rid of this material at the minute. So if that material is taken by someone else and properly recycled, we're not going to be crying about it, no.
Yeah.
I think from our position, we'd be incentivised to do something like that as well. Like I said, we tried in the past, but ultimately the value to do that against our standard day-to-day business just isn't there. So you do get support from the compliance schemes, but what comes down is quite minimal, let's say. So if there's other schemes available to us, like I said, we have vans, we have men, we have a warehouse and an infrastructure to be able to facilitate that. That's something we look into, but ultimately we try and push that ourselves. It just falls on deaf ears.
Can I just make the point that on curbside, and I made this point again, I make no apology for making it again, that if it's the cost that's put on producers, it will be passed back to consumers. It's not something that we can afford within our current business model. And if it's put back to producers and producers have to build it into their cost model, then that will go into the retailer, there will be a retailer margin on it, and then there will be VAT on the top. It will be an extremely expensive way to do it.
But at the minute, the taxpayer is paying for that rather than the producer, so it should be a producer responsibility system. With
respect, I'm not sure I agree with that, because at the moment there is no requirement for curbside on WEEE.
Well, the taxpayer is paying it, as in it's still going in the bin, so the councils are still having to pay to landfill it or put it through incineration.
Well, the customers shouldn't be putting it in the bin. WEEE requirements that stuff shouldn't go in household waste.
That's the whole problem with the WEEE system, is it's going in the bin.
But that's what consumer education is about, and that's why Scott is spending so much money through Material Focus on telling consumers what they need to do.
This is the most interesting bit of the conversation that we've had. Actually, for some time, we don't often have our panellists having a good old ding-dong. But I'm afraid you had finished, Karen. We're going to have to move on. I think Barry had a tiny question, very tiny, because we're going to got Kat's questions to get through.
I wanted to pick up on the French system of repairability. Seems to me that we often talk about repairability, or it's recyclable, and therein lies the problem. What would it be if, in fact, the obligation was placed on the manufacturer to repair something always within a certain period of sale? Now, that could either be through the establishment of repair shops or by a collection and return to the manufacturer. But it seems to me that simply talking about something being repairable isn't actually solving the problem.
As I made the point before, we repair 200,000 of our products every year. They are repairable products. They don't stop becoming repairable when the warranty runs out. We offer an out-of-warranty repair service, which is considerably less than the cost of a replacement product. Consumers have the right to go to an independent repairer. There is a repair option there.
Thank you. Kat Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Risk of starting the ding-dong again. Are there any amendments to the WEEE directive that would be beneficial for the management of waste? Because I got the impression that, Chris, you were maybe sort of edging towards answering some of that earlier, and I think Andrew perhaps might have some suggestions as well. I'm not sure if they're the same suggestions or different, but amendments that would be helpful.
I think the DEFRA's publication on the new proposals for the WEEE regs, I think that is going in the right direction in terms of tackling this WEEE that's in the bins, making it very easy for the householders to do the right thing with their WEEE. So yeah, it's all what's being proposed. If it's seen through, is going to be great. But yeah, obviously you will get business saying it's going to cost consumers a few quid extra on their 500 quid telly, but you know.
Do you think the industry needs more direction from government generally when it comes to address this issue?
Well, I think these new regs will sort it out if they see it through.
Katy, you want to say something?
I think it's heading in the right direction, and just faster action is required on an ever-growing problem. But I would also reiterate my 2 points earlier, sorry for repeating old ground, that it must also include reuse, and I really think that a producer pays system, if that responsibility was passed on to producers, Beaker excluded because you seem to be doing a fantastic job in this space already, but you might see smartphone software updates not becoming such a problem if the responsibility was placed on the producer. And the other piece on that is, yes, I think the regulation that is in place, if it moves forward, will work. Also need to extend it to smaller devices, particularly smartphone, because of quite how damaging they are.
And I'm conscious that I'm up against the clock a little bit here because I think we might be having votes quite soon. But I mean, is there any particular items of e-waste that are particularly challenging? And that you've alluded to it already. Are you suggesting that maybe smaller electronic devices like phones, iPads, laptops are more challenging than the sort of larger white goods?
I think with phones and laptops, we have a commercially viable solution that needs to be lent on a little bit more. The challenges with the bulkier devices is that they struggle to retain their value. So it's two very different challenges for two different products. Whereas I think with the smaller devices, it's low-hanging fruit because of their commercial viability.
Mm-hmm. As well with the smaller devices, and certainly your phones, tablets, the batteries contained inside them, the biggest problem in the industry is they go into skips, they go through them shredders, burst into flames and cause millions of pounds worth of damages. So you know, there's an element there that needs tackling, and I know vapes is one of the big issues at the moment as well, which is a similar sort of problem where it's quite easy to just chuck it in the bin and it becomes someone else's issue down the line.
On vapes, I mean, certainly when I do litter picking in my community, which I think probably most of us probably do as members of Parliament, it seems to be part of the job, you know, it is something that is seen as being very throwaway. Is that something, Katy, that, you know, you've got any thoughts on? I'm conscious that you've worked with a lot of small electronic goods, not particularly vapes, though, presumably.
Vapes would be too difficult, but I know, Scott, I think you're still in the room. You probably have a lot to say on the vapes front shortly.
Right, so I'll leave that for the next panel then.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully the ban on vapes will sort that one out.
Yeah, let's all hope. Katy, what do you think has been done to improve, or what, if anything, has been done to improve the sort of reliability of products by manufacturers in terms of them not breaking, not needing to be replaced?
What has been done or what needs to be done?
If anything has been done, I suppose I'm asking what, and what do you think needs to be done? You've alluded to the software updates. Is there anything else that manufacturers and
I think I'm repeating old ground with your precious time. It is around the
I'm just
parts.
making sure you've...
it is around the parts, the affordability and the availability of the parts.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the topics like repair index would help.
Thank you. No?
Thank you, Ken.
Covered it all off.
Well, I think that conveniently brings us to the end of our first panel in good time for us to be able to not have to suspend the sitting. So I'm going to thank our panellists, Chris Chandler, Katy Medlock, Andrew Mullen and Sam Mountain. And we've got 10 minutes. I think we will actually suspend the sitting, but I don't think we'll be able to make enough progress and then come back to the second panel. So order. Thank you very much indeed. We will be stopping in...
is currently suspended. The proceeding 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 is currently suspended.
The Environmental Audit Committee. I should have started with an order. I'm very grateful to our witnesses for our second panel who've been able to stay following our spell in the chamber. And I'd like to start by inviting from Scott Butler on my right to just introduce yourself. Scott, welcome. You've given evidence to the committee before, but not all of our members may have been here when you spoke last time.
Okay, thanks for having me back. I'm Scott Butler. I'm the Executive Director of an organisation called Material Focus. We've existed for about 4 years, and we work on all things waste electricals and portable batteries, and we work in 3 areas. We have an insight strand, which produces a lot of research. Some of the numbers that you've been hearing today emanate from that. We have an investment strand where we put grants and other funding to local authorities and others to collect more electricals for reuse or recycling. And we have an inspiration strand, which is a Recycle Your Electricals campaign. And also as part of that, getting the message and the story about waste electricals far and wide. For example, we were on the One Show last night talking about an interesting project in Newcastle, and across the BBC a couple of weeks ago talking about the drawers of doom, which unite us all. Is that drawer full of cables and remote controls?
Well, you'll bring broadcast again today, so that's a triple for you in a fortnight. Very good. And welcome to Libby Peake, who's given evidence to us before from the Green Alliance. Libby.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Head of Resource Policy at Green Alliance, which is a charity and think tank that focuses on achieving ambitious leadership for the environment. And waste electricals and electronics is an issue that we return to time and time and again because of its massive environmental impact that's not yet been addressed.
Thank you. And I think this is your debut before our committee. Izzi Monk from the Royal Society of Chemistry.
Thank you very much. My name is Izzi Monk. I'm Policy Advisor for the Environment at the Royal Society of Chemistry, which is the UK's professional body for chemical scientists with more than 56,000 members around the world. We have a global not-for-profit publishing business and are a leading investor in UK chemistry education. And also alongside my time at the RSC, I've recently completed an MSc in Sustainability and Behaviour Change, where I was researching what end users in the UK do with small items of electrical equipment and the underlying reasons for this behaviour.
Thank you. Well, this panel is focused more on WEEE's role within the circular economy and what we can do from your perspective as observers rather than such active participants. So perhaps we could start with another general question about what more the government should be doing to support a transition to a circular economy within electrical goods. Should we start with Scott?
I think what's interesting in what's proposed in the changes to the waste electrical regulations in relation to the circular economy impacts of electricals as a whole is it's starting to try and tackle that through the proposals around getting better measures in the system, because at the moment we have a sort of weight-based target which is not really capturing the kinds of things that we've heard about earlier today and previously in the inquiry, which is how much stuff is being reused, what materials are we getting out of the electricals, what's in the electricals in the first place so we can target certain behaviours, so how much aluminium, steel, copper, moving on to critical raw materials as well. How easy is it for the public to do the things that we want them to do, so what's the accessibility to drop-off points, curbside collections, because they're key drivers. If our objective is to not lose electricals to bins or to drawers or to landfill, and a key part of that has to be making it easier for the public to do what we want them to do. That's just behavioural science. It's nothing new there. And of course there are costs, we heard about those before, costs associated with that, but they're on the table now. So we need to make some decisions about, based on evidence, what is the best route for us to make it easy, and also what collection methods are the right things for the right type of product. How you collect a washing machine in a fridge is not how you want to be collecting a smart device, is not how you want to be collecting a toaster or a kettle, or also some of this cheap fast tech that we've been talking around, this 500 million items a year that are being sold and thrown away, which is never going to be reused or repaired. It's not designed to be. Measures need to take place around whether that should be on the market or not, of course. That's not for the waste electrical regulations to fix. But at that back end, we want to make recycling the worst thing that we do with our electricals, lift everything up from out of the bin, and then across the top of that we need much more activity around reuse, donation for digital inclusion, selling electricals to give them second life. So there's a lot of stuff that's in there, and it's signalling the right sort of behaviours, But I think I just wanted to make the point that it's not the waste electrical regulations that are going to fix all of the issues around the circularity of the electronics industry.
You raised lots of issues there. Are you making recommendations through the consultation at the moment about what are some of the best ways to do this?
We're not making recommendations, we're acting. We've been acting over the last 4 years. So we've funded 50 projects that have made it easier for 12 million more people to do what we want them to do. We built a national postcode locator, Recycle Your Electricals, where you can meet our HypnoCat and he will guide you, pop in your postcode. Yes, we have a pink, psychedelic, trans-loving HypnoCat as our messenger. We're cutting through, we're using tactics just to cut through a noisy world. But we started with 3,500 collection points. We now have 22,000. So, our recommendations are actually in our actions in what we're doing.
Thank you. Libby, you're more in the business of making recommendations. What are you telling the government they should be doing?
Yes, I have a lot of recommendations. It's going to be hard to distill it into a concise statement, but I think probably the most important thing, and to make reference to your previous report, I think one of the best recommendations in that was that you need to ensure that levels of consumption are brought to within sustainable levels. And it was quite shocking to us that there wasn't even any sort of recognition in either the consultation document or the call for evidence that we are consuming far too many of these materials or the sort of supply chain impacts that that's going to have. So recently the UN published new data that showed that the UK is clinging on to its rather unhappy title of being the second worst electronics producer, waste electronics producer in the world, only behind Norway, but we produce 3 times the global average and nearly 50% again compared to the EU. So we have a real problem in the UK with producing too much electronic waste through through so many of them. And the focus from the government is perpetually on recycling as the sort of most important thing, and that was the focus of the consultation, and there was a bit more in the call for evidence, but not too much more. So our number one recommendation would be to start targeting reduction. And I suppose the frustrating thing about this WEEE consultation is that the government did take new powers after your initial inquiry that would allow it to set reduction targets. It took new producer responsibility obligation powers that allow it to set all sorts of different targets, and the focus still remains on recycling, which is something that you want to do at the very end of exhausting all of the other options. And I think there are various reasons why this is the case, but one thing to probably point out as important is that this should be an issue across government, and lots of different departments have interest in it and play a role and talk about the circular economy, but when it comes to actually exercising powers, they continually point to DEFRA as holding the levers, but then within DEFRA the focus is on end of life and keeping materials out of landfill. So a lot more needs to be done in terms of design and business models, and I hope we get onto that throughout the session.
Have you engaged with the former business department, or business and trade department as it now is, to see how interested they are in this?
Yeah, and they are interested, and they are doing a programme of work actually that's looking at resource efficiency options across various different sectors, one of which is electronics. They haven't published that report, but they are going to publish it soon. So that's something that's going to be looking into opportunities for reducing electronic waste, or reducing emissions associated with electronics. The trouble with that is that that's not actually policy, and I suppose our frustration is that this consultation was nearly 4 years overdue, and during those 4 years, they didn't take the time to develop real policy recommendations that would bring producer responsibility, that would change the incentives to produce all of this electronic waste. And I suppose one other thing to point out is one of our big disappointments, and one of the areas where you had a firm commitment from government on matching or exceeding what the EU did was on eco-design, which is normally used with energy-related products. And at the very first hurdle, they've fallen. They haven't done that, and we haven't heard what they're going to do about that. So the EU recently brought in new standards for tablets and phones, which do really good things, like they have standards for durability, there's repairability in there, things have to have spare parts available for 7 years after they're on the market. There's been radio silence about that from the UK government, so we're not doing that. And the EU is now bringing in a new directive, a new regulation to replace the Eco-Design Directive, which is looking to make horizontal standards for products. So At the moment, they do it on a product-by-product basis, which is quite a laborious way. But in the future, this new approach is going to allow them to set standards for similar products across the board, saying these have to last this amount of time, these have to have this amount of repairability, they have to have this information. We don't know what the UK is going to do, but so far they haven't followed through with their promise to match or exceed the EU.
Can I turn to Izzi? Izzi, I was going to ask you about manufacturers, but is there anything you'd like to say about what you think the government should be doing before?
Yeah, absolutely. So we very much think that government should be developing and delivering a clear strategy, a coherent strategy that enables a circular economy of materials in the UK. We've talked a little bit already about some of the materials that these products contain. Everything that we use has an impact on the environment and human health, and I think the UN report, the recently published Global Resources Outlook, made it very clear that our unsustainable resource usage globally is driving the triple planetary crisis of climate change, waste and pollution, and biodiversity loss. So not only does the extraction and processing and usage of these materials and then the waste at the end of life have environmental and human health impacts, but there's also the critical minerals that are contained within many of these products as well. And I think with government strategies so far, for example, the critical mineral strategy does talk about the need for a circular economy, and the recently published battery strategy, again, there's allusions to the circular economy, but we lack this kind of clear, overarching, coherent set of measures that are needed to really enable the circular economy. Things like investment in recycling infrastructure. I know it's the bottom of the waste hierarchy, but it is going to be really important to recover those materials. Moving measures to move up the waste hierarchy overall, so infrastructure to support repair and remanufacturing and reuse will all be really crucial, but also things in the product design phase as well. So incentivising that product design, eco-design choices, and also things like supporting research into materials which are overall better for the environment and support material substitution decisions as well.
You mentioned the precious metal content and the smaller devices in particular. There was an innovative business in my constituency which was using a pyrolysis system to break down printed circuit boards into their components, and they showed me an ingot of gold about that big that they'd extracted from their prototype plant. Unfortunately, they didn't get planning consent to proceed because of concerns about noxious emissions, which may or may not have been justified, but it was disappointing because that was, I think it would have been the first such plant in the UK. Are you, given your role within the Royal Society, are there sort of technological advances which making you confident that we can extract in a cost-efficient and a safe environmental way some of the constituent critical minerals that are going into these products?
Yes, so there is mainly used at the moment what are called pyrometallurgical processes, so it's using heat to extract and recover metals. That's particularly good for recovering some of the precious metals, so for example gold, but where it's less good as a process is recovering some of the critical minerals, and they are absolutely vital not only in electronics but in the healthcare sector and security and in renewable technology. So I think around 20% of critical minerals currently are going into low carbon technology, so absolutely vital to support net zero transition. We need investment and support for those recycling technologies that maybe are better able to recover some of those critical minerals, and some of that is things are in their infancy, in the research stage, and it needs to sort of be supported through the Valley of Death, and others is building the infrastructure to do this.
I think sort of with the case of gold and other precious metals, it is possible to see how a business case would be possible, even if you can't get planning permissions. The thing that you hear quite often is there's 100 times more gold in a ton of electronics as there is in a ton of gold ore. So if you mine that's easier than mining. You get a lot more value out of that. It is much harder with the critical raw materials, which aren't used in such vast quantities and which are quite often destroyed through shredding processes. And there are some recycling technologies that are being developed for that. I think they are very much, that some of them based on bacteria, using bacteria, but they are quite often at very early stages. So definitely more needs to be done on that. But I suppose the thing that's quite missing quite often in the discussion about recycling and what more could be done is that the best way to preserve those would be not to put them into the recycling process to begin with. So you can still into any sort of mechanical or chemical recycling process. So if you can ensure that products are designed to be disassembled, you can maintain that value. And Green Alliance did some research a little while ago which looked at a smartphone, and it found that the value of the materials in the smartphone, if you shred it, is less than £1, but the value of the parts is over £100, and the value of the entire phone would be close to £300. So the focus on recycling, again, will destroy a lot of value.
So our manufacturers, I mean, take phones, if you say there's £300 of value in a phone once it's been used once, I mean, used for a year or 2 years on a contract and sold, why are the manufacturers not doing more to retain that value, and they're producing them as disposable products?
I suppose phones is actually one area where we have seen change, and you had back market on earlier. I got my last phone from back market. I think it's particularly actually becoming much more popular with Gen Z and the younger generation. Hubbub and Virgin Media O2 did some research, and I think it was over 50% of people in that age bracket had repaired phones or got second-hand phones. It's a really high proportion, so that is becoming more possible. And I suppose the thing where there is a clear business case that's going to happen, we do also need to be concerned about those things where there's not a clear business case, and I'll point to Scott as having some good data again on things like fast tech and the growth of fast tech, and these are cheap products that aren't going to retain much value and that are being purchased very, very frequently, and there's not going to be the resale value across the board for electronics, only for like the big ticket items, like phones and tablets and laptops.
I think I was pondering this the other day. The origins of the waste electrical regulations are probably about 25 years now. And at the time, the big concern was cooling, was fridges, and was CFC gases, which were used to be the coolant for the fridges. It was about ozone depletion, and there was all the conversations about fridge mountains and all these things. If you think about what's happened to technology since then, it's outstanding. You know, the iPhone didn't exist 20 years ago, and now smartphones are ubiquitous. And I think it's to the point I've made earlier, and will continue to make, is that we need a degree of sophistication in how we are targeting the behaviours we want around different types of technology. Not all electricals are the same, yet they're clubbed together. A fridge is very different from an iPhone. It's very different from that cheap cable that you've bought at the newsagents at the train station when you've forgotten your old one. And you need, it's a cliche of horses for courses, you need the right solutions for the right things. But what we are seeing as well is that particularly, I'll mention it because it was called out, but you see this rise of fast tech, and the poster child of that fast tech is something like a single-use vape, and there's the whole story around vape. But let's focus on the environmental bits, because that's the bit that we focus on. And you know, you've got 5 million a week being thrown away, binned or littered, because there was no effective solution for taking them back in store. You've got producers who have flooded the market with them, who either through ignorance or deliberately have not signed up to pay the bills that they should be paying, despite the fact that long-standing existing regulations were there. You've got retailers, big retailers, high street names, not just specialist vape retailers, who had clear long-standing obligations to be offering take-back that they haven't done with that. And that's just about starting to, after 2 years of us and many other people doing a lot of shouting around how this needs to be remedied. And something that we're seeing is this rise of fast tech. So if you're on the London Underground or any public transport system across the UK, many people have got little personal fans that they're picking up from those same news agents, from low-priced clothing retailers who are adding tech lines all the time, from convenience stores dotted all around as well. And within that fast tech, it's normally portable, are lithium-ion batteries. And the same challenge is posed by vapes, which is a waste of one of the most important materials that we need for a green technology future. The fact that they are in the wrong place and can cause fires, and are causing hundreds, if not thousands, of fires across the UK at the moment. And that storm is coming. It's already over the horizon, and I think that's something that as a sector, we really need to be focusing on, because it's a real challenge and it's not going away fast as it's being sold.
That's very interesting. The last comment for me is you mentioned retailers and take-back schemes. So that was something that we looked at in our last inquiry. You're saying that there is some progress there. Could you just elaborate on that a bit? Because we were hoping to speak to the largest retailer and they've chosen not to come.
Yeah, so on the physical retail side, you've got, I'd say, three main... Can you name check? I can name check the retailers. Three retailers who are going above and beyond what they should do. So Currys are taking back in store without the need for you to buy anything. B&Q have got some great units which they've popped outside the entrance where you can recycle small electricals, batteries and light bulbs. And John Lewis and Waitrose are now stepping up and will take anything back regardless of whether you're buying something new. The current legal obligation is this like-for-like thing. A big part of what we do is communicate to the public. Every point of friction, every complication you have in your message means you're losing people. That like-for-like is one of those things that confuses people. It's not instantaneous. It's another problem. I can't be bothered. So what will they do with it? They'll put it in a drawer or they'll put it in the bin. So simplifying that process means that we could simplify the communications, which will mean that we are collecting more electricals. It's just it's a simple X, Y, Z sort of thing. But also the challenges with the good retailers is that even they sometimes struggle to communicate to their staff this offer. So what we've had is recently feedback where somebody who's working part-time over the weekend is not sure that they should be taking something back. So they'll think, do I want to get in trouble with my assistant manager or my manager? So maybe I won't. But what we're also seeing is an increase in traction. More and more people are aware of this because we're getting more stories, we're communicating through local authorities, through those retailers. So the opportunity to do more in that retail environment is definitively there. But online retail, they don't have those physical spaces. They can bury messages, they can meet the law by putting a message on page 983 of their website. Pages don't literally exist on websites, but I think you get the drift. And that's where the challenge needs to be. And I think, government are proposing changes to online marketplaces. And you've got the known online marketplaces. And now with fast tech and other things, we've got these unknown online marketplaces, which are also a new challenge. And from a regulatory perspective, pose a lot of challenges because they exist totally outside of our jurisdiction. So there's a lot of there is some progress. But as with everything, as you progress, new challenges appear, and we'll have to work together to tackle them.
Thank you. Have either of you looked at online marketplaces at all in this context?
Not in this context, although when we did our review of the eco-design regulations, one of the main things that we found and that we heard from a lot of people that we were interviewing was that there is already a lot of online marketplaces that aren't adhering to the current regulations and then aren't necessarily displaying the information that they want to. And it's a problem throughout the EU with regulation, but it does result in vast amounts of excess carbon emissions from these online marketplaces not meeting the requirements that in-store places do.
Do you have a study into that you could send us, or is it not published?
No, I do have a study. It's a bit old, but it will show the scale of the problem, I think.
Interesting to have a look. Thank you. Ian Libby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to take just a few minutes to look at the challenges that the industry is suffering at the moment and what the industry is doing to maximise the length of life, reusability and recyclability of technology and how the industry can be encouraged to improve. I purposely asked for this question of the Chair because we bought a very well-known vacuum cleaner a few years ago and it stopped working, and the brushes at the front of the vacuum cleaner weren't turning, but the motor was running and I could hear everything else was working. So I thought I'll take it apart and I'll fix it. I love doing things like that, so I stripped it down. And basically it ended up that when I got to the problem, there was a metal shaft came down from the motor onto a plastic cog. And the metal shaft just wore the plastic cog away, which stopped the brushes turning. You couldn't buy a replacement plastic cog. You had to bin the whole item. And I just thought that is so... From the minute you bought it, from the minute you started using it, it was doomed to fail. And there was nothing you could do once that plastic cog had finished. Had it been a metal cog on a metal shaft, it would have worked for years. and it was a fantastic vacuum cleaner. So just, I'm wondering what challenges you've got at the moment and what we could do to support you, or what things could be put in place. I don't know, Scott, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, previously I worked for a producer, but the focus for our work has been at this end. But I have some expertise or some experience in the sector, and I think, there are pieces of, from a European perspective, pieces of legislation looking at design for durability, design for recyclability. We heard earlier about availability of right to repair and products and spares. I think most producers would say that they design with a performance and a price point in mind, and they make decisions based on how they can produce a product that will hit that price point and hit the performance. I think just instinctively, as a sort of an environmentalist and as a technical, a bit of an engineer in there, you would like to think that products are built to function, but we see that often they're not, and I think it just go back to the point I made earlier around the particular consultation now is that's the end of pipe stuff. I think the UK does have opportunities. I think it will, dare I say, need to be following closely what's happening at the EU level. People don't make products for the UK. They make products for broader markets than that. It's a real life experience. I can imagine it's the same for other products too. And yeah, it's the questions that we should be asking. But unfortunately, I guess in this circumstances, you don't know. You don't take the product apart when you buy it and go, "This is going to break in the future." Yeah.
When you looked at the vacuum cleaner, it looked like like the Rolls Royce of vacuum cleaners. It was going to last for years and years and years. And at one time, you used to have shops on the high street, didn't you? You could take your vacuum cleaner into your, whatever, and people would fix it. We don't have them now.
Yeah, that culture is definitely, and maybe is ripe for a revival around one of the things, because often lots of conversations about circular economy are the big picture, the global sort of things, but actually it's around building up from communities up and those skill sets, but it will need change. It will need access to good parts, and maybe a bit way down the pipe there's opportunities with things like 3D printing where you could be producing the sort of micro industrialization where it's localized, but there's a long way to go, but there's hope. That's a good thing, I guess.
I think probably everyone in the room has a story like yours. Every time we talk about it, people have personal experience of being frustrated, and actually we did some survey work a few years ago which found that 2/3 of people are regularly frustrated by how long products last. So I think it is a widespread problem, but there are definitely known solutions, and I don't want to just point to the EU as leading the way, but they are doing a lot more, and the UK could follow suit. The EU actually did just pass some consumer rights legislation that focuses on the issue of planned obsolescence, and I wouldn't say that they necessarily got it right, because they didn't directly address planned obsolescence, but they've now made it illegal. It will be illegal. It's a regulation, so the member states will have to lay regulations so that it's illegal to market something that has a life-limiting factor. So it's now going to be a crime to knowingly promote something that has planned obsolescence as a feature. The only country that, as far as I'm aware, that has actually banned planned obsolescence is France, and we do quite often point to France as leading the way on a lot of these things. It actually came in I think 2015, and it is illegal there, and you can face millions of pounds of fines and up to 2 years in jail if you do something along those lines. So far as I'm aware, it's only that power has only been used once. They took Apple to court in 2017 for a software update that limited the life of iPhones, and they had to pay a €25 million fine. I don't think anyone went to jail, but it was a deterrent. Yeah. So they have done something, and the EU is doing something. But I think there is a lot more that we could be doing, and the idea of a genuine right to repair is a really important one, and the right to repair has 3 pillars. First of all, that products should be designed to be repaired, and that has to be the starting point. Secondly, that people should have access to information, because it's not only the fact that things are difficult to be repaired, but it's often that they're expensive to be repaired and people don't know how to do it themselves. They have to either get a professional or someone who's linked to the original manufacturer to repair, and that adds a lot of cost and inconvenience. And also that spare parts have to be available and they have to be affordable. The EU is actually just, I think, about to publish some new right to repair legislation, which isn't as ambitious as the right to repair movement wants to see, but it is definitely a step in the right direction, and the UK could follow suit and could exceed it. The government, when it introduced its last set of eco-design standards, did claim that it was giving people a right to repair, but I would strongly contest that claim. Those were just for a few sets of white goods and televisions and lighting, and it didn't give people any sort of right to repair. It gave it mandated that those products had to be repairable, and that information had to be available to professional repairers, but not to the public. And a lot of the times there are problems that the public should be able to fix themselves, and that's the only way it's going to happen, because convenience is really key. And then the EU has just brought in these new eco-design standards, which do have they say you have to have repairability for smartphones, durability for smartphones, spare parts have to be available. They don't actually have anything to do with they haven't laid any regulations to do with affordability, which is obviously an important thing. And then other things that you could do, like France has a repairability index, and the UK government has expressed interest in pursuing that sort of route as well, but haven't really done anything on the ground with that yet.
Lovely, thank you. Izzi?
Yeah, so I think much of what Scott and Libby have said already, I very much echo. I think one of the things around repair and so on is it's absolutely crucial to be keeping materials circulating for as long as possible, as a high value as possible. So repairability, remanufacturing, reuse are all absolutely vital. I think a lot comes back to the design of a product, and that's not just about design to disassemble it. That is extremely important. So things like the screws that it uses or the adhesives that are used and whether things are glued onto circuit boards, that makes a big difference. But it also goes back further than that to the chemical material design as well. Needs to be thought about really carefully. So this involves people right across the value chain of a product or the life cycle of a product. And there's a need for potentially at times to balance things like durability, recyclability, longevity, because we want to be able to circulate materials at a high value. So those choices that need to be made are not necessarily absolutely clear-cut. And things like the life cycle analysis of a product right from the extraction phase to the waste phase is absolutely crucial, and making really evidence-informed decisions about what is the best thing to be doing. And I think something that we have, certainly as the Royal Society of Chemistry, have heard quite a lot from our communities. There's quite a lot of silos, basically, of people across the value chain not really talking to each other. And there is a risk of things like burden shifting emissions. So we just displace greenhouse gas emissions from one part to another part. And we absolutely need to make sure we're not doing that.
Lovely, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Paragon.
Can I ask each of you, what was the last piece of electrical equipment that you actually took back to the shop? Libby, do you want to go first?
I've never actually used the shop. I have recycled my electricals, but I've never dropped it off at the shop.
I did take some. I've had to buy quite a few vapes to look at them and take them apart. So I did take some vapes back to my local supermarket, partly to cause a bit of trouble as well. But the last thing I repaired was I got a new dog who's eaten 6 remote controls, and I was really pleased because I took one bit from one and one bit from another, put them together, and then forgot to put the remote control on the mantelpiece, and he came down in the morning and he'd done another one. So I did take a vape to a shop.
You're of the Ian Levy school, take it apart.
I was really chuffed. For about 8 hours I was really chuffed with myself, and then it all went away again.
I don't have a dog.
So I have also not managed to take any electricals back to a shop, partly because I live in quite a small town and not really any opportunity to do that. I also don't have access to a car, so I haven't been able to take electricals to household waste recycling, apart from when I've asked someone else to take them for me. And so I think that makes a really important illustration of the convenience. You know, I'm highly motivated to do the right thing with
I didn't ask the question to embarrass you, or I asked the question to make the point about convenience.
And I think that's what it's different. Again, different types of products and different people, the demographics of this. So if you live in semi-rural or suburban, access to a car, you've had a family, you've got used to visiting your local authority site, It's harder now than it was with booking and all these other things, but okay, you'll do it, you've got that time. But if you're 18, 22-year-old, you're living in digs in Camden, you don't have space, you don't have a lot of room, you can't access your local authority site anyway, because you need to be in a car from a safety perspective to even get onto the site. That's where those options kick in. I guess that's what you're leading into.
Look, I wanted to focus on the sustainability of the supply chain. And I suppose really that you can take that in a number of ways, sustainability of the supply chain. It can be the political sustainability in terms of the geographical monopoly that certain countries might have on raw materials. You can take it in terms of the sustainability in terms of the materials themselves and the impact that they're having on the environment. So take it whichever way you like. How sustainable are the supply chains that surround, first of all, the electronics, and does it make sense to talk about the sustainability of the supply chains of electronic waste? Because having sustainability and waste in the same sentence like that seems to jar with me, but don't know who wants to pick up on that.
I think there's a lot to say about sustainability of supply chain and what more needs to be done to, first of all, understand the risks. And I think sort of, particularly when it comes to critical raw materials, there's increasing awareness that there are risks, but not so much in awareness about what needs to be done. And I think in the UK, again, this is something that we should be particularly concerned about, because in comparison to other similarly developed countries and allies, we have relatively few resources. We have few critical raw materials. Some of those that we did have already been exploited, and those that remain, and there are some, notably with lithium that you hear about a lot, but there are some, there's cobalt and other things. A lot of those tend to be in quite treasured natural national park areas and that sort of thing, and so it's difficult to see a willingness in future to dig those up to get to those materials. So we are particularly exposed, we're particularly reliant on other countries to supply our materials, and we're particularly exposed to volatile markets and supply chains. And to their credit, DBT has started doing some digging into this. They commissioned a task and finish group on resilience for supply chains for critical raw materials. And I'd certainly commend that task and finish group report to this group, because it has some really interesting findings in it. The first of which I'd say is that there's lots of different types of risk. Obviously, the concern is geopolitics, and we are right to be concerned about that. You have situations where China is quite dominant in not only the production, the mining, but also the processing of a lot of these different materials. And so we're reliant on countries we don't necessarily want to be reliant on, but so is the rest of the world. But it's not only geopolitical risk, there are environmental and social risks. And I think a lot of companies, although there are now due diligence obligations in place, coming into place in the EU, and there's regulations about conflict minerals, the sort of due diligence supply chain monitoring is largely being seen as a tick box exercise, and so the amount of data isn't actually allowing us to understand what risks are. And I think it's rising up the agenda, but a lot of people still don't understand the risks. But in terms of the environmental impacts include biodiversity loss, water stress, pollution. Obviously greenhouse gases is a big one, so there's all those sorts of environmental risks.
And human rights.
And then when it comes to social rights, you have health and safety, you've got forced labour, you've got child labour. All these sorts of things can be associated with the accessing of materials. They're not always, but we're quite blind to it in a lot of ways. We don't necessarily know. And the feeling amongst a lot of people that we've spoken to is that we're almost always underestimating those sort of risks. We're talking about geopolitical risks, but not necessarily the others. So that's the first lesson. The second is that electronics are far from the only sector that needs this. Izzi's already alluded to this, but it's needed in chemistry, it's needed in renewable energy, it's needed in defense and aerospace, it's needed in medical devices. And we've actually heard from some in the consumer electronics sector that they might in future struggle more than these other sectors to access these materials. But I suppose a major point of concern at the moment is there's no strategic look at what the sort of demand is going to be and how you can reasonably distribute the demand and prioritise the right sectors that are going to need it and reduce the demand elsewhere. And then the final point specific to electronics that you'll find in that report is that electronics have non-substitutable demand for not just critical raw materials, but the four conflict minerals, and those are the ones that are quite often associated with severe human rights abuse and armed conflict. And so we are at real risk of offshoring our impacts, yes.
Thank you. You've given us a wonderfully comprehensive analysis of the problem. This committee, of course, has to produce a report with recommendations about solutions. And so I would ask you, how can we improve the sustainability of those supply chains? You spoke about no comprehensive strategy. What needs to be in that strategy? What are the measures that government should be taking to improve the sustainability of the supply chains?
So by far the most important thing that they need to be doing is looking at how we can reduce demand for these materials. The government's critical minerals strategy did have circularity as one of its pillars, saying that we need to do that, and that is true. But by far the most effective way to reduce your exposure to these international markets and to reduce your impact is to need less of them in the first place. So this isn't related to consumer electronics, but the sort of approach would be the same if we were going to look at consumer electronics. We looked at how far we could reasonably reduce our demand for energy in this country through improving public transport, through better insulating our homes, through slightly changing our diets. And that report showed that if we took demand reduction seriously, we could reduce our need for a couple of critical raw materials like cobalt and lithium for renewable energy by 50% by 2030 compared to business as usual. So that is the most sensible way to approach it, but it hasn't been talked about. And you see, it, just to relate it back to consumer electronics, there's been no mention at all of how we could reduce our use of consumer electronics. And if you did that, then you could meet your demand much more sustainably and then meet the remaining demand with recycled or reused content.
So disrupt business as usual, in effect. But yes, Mr. Butler, if I can come to you, what changes that have been made by business have made the biggest impact on improving?
If I may, I take a little bit of a different interpretation of supply chain, which follows on. I agree very fully with everything Libby was saying there, is that you would have heard of the concept of the urban mine. So surrounding us, or maybe you haven't, but surrounding us are all these materials embedded in our buildings, our homes, our lives. We're carrying them around with us as well. We don't actually know what's in that account. We don't have a national account of all the materials that are actually in and already out of the ground and out and about. We don't know how many of them are redundant or could be changed for a more environmentally preferable option or not. We've got 880 million items of consumer electronics sitting in UK homes. We're throwing away, actually the numbers have gone down a little bit, we're throwing away around 105,000 tonnes of electricals at the moment. It's not good either, just the fact that it's gone down a little bit. That's the second time we've done that research, so it's not a trend yet, we're just dropping that in. But we think at least $1 billion...
Is that figure for 2023?
For 2022, so it was delivered. It's with the committee, you have that. Over £1 billion in material value we know is being lost through just consumer electronics. 200,000 tonnes of business electricals are being thrown away every year. That's the cabling and all that.
But again, you're analysing the problem quite correctly, and I'm totally with you. But what I want to know is what can business, or what has business done to provide us with the solution, and what are the recommendations we should be making in our report?
I was trying to get there. So you have UK electrical recyclers. Great businesses who are making investments in recovering many materials, employing lots of people. One of the recommendations in the UK WEEE consultation is around better metrics, which is doing that bank accounting, doing that accounting in the first place. When we understand what materials we have, we can start to make this plan to say, okay, how are we going to access them, in what way, and how are we going to measure that? The first stage, though, is already in the consultation itself, is measuring them. That will take a little chunk of time, and from that we can actually make plans and then invest in and continue to invest in technologies that can target the materials that together we agree are critical. And that's, I think, it's not the most sexiest answer, but the first thing is do some counting. Let's do some maths.
Well, the Office of National Statistics is fairly far from looking at its natural capital accounts in terms of the mountains that you're talking about around us. But you would like to see us prioritise that as one of the baselines, in effect, from which we can begin to move in getting more sustainable supply chains. Is that right?
What we did with the communications campaign, the first thing that you do is understand what you're looking at. To set a plan without understanding what you're looking at, if you're successful, that's luck. It's not skill, it's not judgment. So the first step always has to be understand the game that's in front of you before you then decide whether you're going to play 4-4-2 or 4-5-1 or whatever tactics you're going to play.
Can I just say something else that the ONS has done that the government asked them to do was to look into the business case for a national materials data hub, which is something that I've never met anyone who doesn't say that's a fantastic idea. And so far as I'm aware, that isn't dead, but it's just completely stalled, and they haven't yet started their pilot product, which should have started ages ago. To get that off the ground, to fully comprehend the flow of materials in our economy, they expected it to take 10 to 12 years. So every year that it's delayed, it's going to be a decade on from where we need to be. So I'd say certainly recommend as a priority, revitalise the drive for a national materials data hub, particularly probably having critical raw materials as a priority thing to investigate, just because there is so much risk associated with them. But other things that could be recommended is using material passports more effectively. The government is still in an exploration phase when it comes to using digital product passports, and they could be doing a lot more, and that could be an effective thing. And actually, when it comes to consumer electronics, the EU is bringing some in probably from 2027 in their sort of it's the second thing they're going to bring in after batteries. So there is a solution there that we could adapt and follow and benefit from as well.
Great, good ideas there. Ms. Monk, you wanted to come in.
Yes,
could I ask you maybe to focus also on the sort of the facilities that we have in the UK for recovery and reprocessing materials from e-waste, which I suspect is more your department in the Royal Society of Chemistry.
I just wanted to echo this point around data collection. It is extremely important that we are able to map and track critical mineral and material streams, both within electronics, but in so much other stuff in society. As Scott said, without that information, it's very difficult to make good decisions from that. And I think this is one of the reasons why the RSC is calling for this need for this clear overarching strategy to prevent things falling through the gaps between departments or between different government strategies. In terms of other things which will help to improve the sustainability of supply chains, recovery and recycling and enabling a circular economy is not a silver bullet solution, and reduces at the top of the waste hierarchy and is really key. But we do need to be working on investing in the technologies, both in terms of developing those technologies, but also the recycling infrastructure that's needed. So some of those alternatives to, say, pyrometallurgical processes, so hydrometallurgical processes, may be something that needs to be looked at and to be considered. So I think
formulate that for me, if you will, just a little bit more in terms of a recommendation.
So I'd say that our recommendation is that there needs to be investment in recycling infrastructure and technologies to enable the recovery of critical minerals and other materials that we need to be used as secondary resources and to prevent their leakage from the economy. That would be our recommendation around recycling, alongside the clear overarching strategy for sector.
Thank you very much. Now, you also referred to that being, as it were, at the bottom of the hierarchy, but we haven't talked much about the top of the hierarchy, the design, the importance of design, the importance of modularity. Is there anything that you would like to add by way of recommendations that government should be looking at there?
Again, I think it's about incentivising eco-design principles and thinking about those carefully and making sure that the balances and the trade-offs between things like repairability, recyclability, longevity, or durability, are carefully considered, and that it requires that evidence to be there and that understanding to be there as well.
And how should that incentivization take place? Are we talking about penalties if people don't do it? Are we talking about subsidies if they do? What sort of mix of carrot and stick can government use to get business to do the right thing in terms of its design process, and thinking about this right at the start of when it's beginning to develop a product, rather than developing a product because they see a gap in the market and then thinking, oh hell, what do we do with it after its life is finished?
I'm probably not best placed to comment on the specifics of that.
Do you want to go?
Well, I would certainly endorse again the need for eco-design standards, and to point out that the eco-design standards that have been used for energy efficiency are potentially quite useful to use on resource efficiency, and you can set standards, and the EU is going to set them horizontally for product categories on things like durability, repairability, reusability. You set those. You can also do things to incentivize people to make the right purchases by doing more things like labeling, and that's the same sort of thing that you've seen with the energy efficiency labeling complementing the standards. So you set a standard, so you push the worst things off the market, you pull people towards the right things. I think that's a really effective way to go about it. But you could also use the design standards or information about design to influence the fees that are being paid through producer responsibility scheme, and that's something that is kind of touched upon in the call for evidence, but it's not something that they've really developed their thinking on. But I would certainly say if there's an easy way to set a standard and just say you can't put in anything on the market unless it is this good, that is more effective than trying to sort of incentivize people to do the right thing.
I would just say I think also it's easy to underestimate the power of us as consumers. I was reflecting the other day on with my new dog and the walks that I now have. I have more time for reflection, and I was
put the dog down because it ate your remote control.
No, I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe one more time. But I was thinking about waste electricals in relation to free-range eggs. Bear with me on this. Which is, I was looking at the growth. If you think about where we were 20 years ago with free-range eggs, I had a conversation with a mate of mine in a pub. And he was going, what's the point in buying free-range eggs? It doesn't do anything. And I was saying, well, it signals. We didn't just talk about football. We talked about free-range eggs. And it said it's sending signals. You're sending signals to the farming industry. You're sending signals to food manufacturers about what you care about. And now, if you think about where we are, free-range eggs are the biggest market, not least when there's struggles with other things going on, but also within products. Almost, that big mayonnaise brands are all free-range eggs and all this stuff. And we're sort of in the same place with waste electricals, in electricals arguably, in that the power of the consumer is there. We just need to nourish it and turn it on, and start making more sensible decisions in what you buy, how you treat, how you value this tech, because tech gives us loads of values in our life: connectivity, productivity, health, home, cooking, all these things. But we don't value it when we no longer need it. We don't value the materials within inside of it. And that can also then link through to some of the purchasing decisions that we make. Maybe embracing more business model options, not becoming so obsessed with ownership and being more interested in delivery of the services that we need. So it's just to say that call out, actually, ultimately, if you have more mindful consumption, use of all these things, will ultimately be a much bigger driver than a piece of legislation that will always be 10 years behind the times because of how rapid innovation is and can be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. Chris Chope.
Hi there. Can I first of all apologise for not having been here earlier to listen to your opening remarks, because this is a fascinating subject, and I know that so many of our constituents are really interested in it as consumers. The government issued a consultation paper in December, asking people what they thought could be done to improve the situation. And I don't know whether you as individuals or collectively have responded to that, but we in this room are legislators, And that means we're interested in what specific legislative or regulatory proposals you think the government should be bringing forward in order to improve the situation. I wondered if each of you in turn could summarise what legislative proposals you'd like to see in place.
I have so many that I would like to see in place. I've mentioned a few of them. I'll highlight again the thing I think is most important is to focus on reduction, and they do have the power to do that now. They could set reduction targets, they could set reuse targets. Reuse targets got a look in the call for evidence document, but reduction didn't. I think in terms of things that I haven't touched upon yet, so some of the most important things that need to be addressed are powers that are related to Treasury, because Treasury has been quite silent on this agenda, not just for electronics, but for resources and circular economy in general. And there are certainly ways in which the tax system and sort of Treasury's policies of investment haven't been driving the right sorts of behaviours. So I know that the committee last time around picked up on the need to reduce VAT on repair. That is something that still needs to be done, and we could, with our Brexit freedoms, reduce VAT to 0 on repair and go beyond what other EU countries have done, which they've got 6% for repair practices. We charge full rate on repair, and we know that cost is one of the main reasons why people don't pursue this. So that isn't helping. There are other countries that are also, in addition to using those sorts of tax incentives, are actually offering people actual vouchers and incentives to take part in repair, in Austria and in France in particular. And France is funded by EPR fees. So if you're looking to overhaul EPR, you could actually get incentives in place to drive the activities that you want to see, not just place obligations about recycling. I think that there are other ways in which the tax system is also driving the wrong sorts of things. And one of those is that it's not only VAT on repair, but VAT on resold products. Unless you're a charity, for the most part, VAT is charged on resold products, which doesn't really make any sense because there's been no value added at that point. You are double taxing that product. So eliminating that sort of double tax on a product would be quite helpful. There's also some problems with seed investment funds, that tax relief funds that the Treasury administers, in that if a company has assets over £200,000, they can't access those sort of tax incentives. And if you have really expensive electronics, it's easy to see that you would hit that threshold quite soon. So that's disincentivizing a sort of leasing approach where the company maintains the assets and can lease them out. And there's plenty of other things. We have a whole report on what more Treasury needs to do, but it does feel, in our conversations with businesses, and there are lots of small businesses that are doing the right thing, but they struggle to scale up, and there are problems with accessing finance, but also just with the way the tax system is structured.
Before asking the others, can I just ask a couple of supplementaries on that? You mentioned VAT on repairs. Would you include in that servicing? Because one of the problems with a lot of products is that people don't have them serviced, which means that they then break down more quickly than they would otherwise do. And have you calculated what the costs, in inverted commas, to the Treasury would be of introducing such a change in the VAT regime? Because obviously the Treasury is always talking about the costs being prohibitive. But obviously, if we can ascertain what the costs might be, then we can work out what the benefits might be on the other side of the equation.
Yes, we have. Well, we've done some analysis of the jobs from increasing repair and remanufacturing, and have that sort of data. We haven't done analysis of the impact on the Treasury for this VAT reduction, but we haven't done it for other areas. But in other areas, it is notable that if you're just looking at the impact, and Treasury will just look at the impact on their VAT revenues, but not at the impact on the wider economy. So I think the point that we make to Treasury is that you can't just look at that in a vacuum if you're going to be incentivizing a lot more in the way of jobs, because then actually you'll be getting revenue in another way. And the analysis that we did on jobs in the circular economy, most of them are in remanufacturing and repair. So if and there's nearly 500,000 potential if you really go for this sort of circular economy across the board. So you would be getting revenue from that as well. And I think I'd like to see in the future the Treasury take account of the second order implications of these changes.
Yes, and on servicing, VAT on?
We haven't done that.
You haven't done that? Yeah, would you like to have a go, Izzi?
Sure. I think I can't, from the Royal Society of Chemistry's remit, talk about some of the specific incentives here. But I think, as Libby has already said, repair is often quite expensive and so on. So incentivising or supporting that repair infrastructure will be really important. I think also if we look at the material value contained within many, coming back to electronics, I think the stats from the UN Global Resource Outlook was that $62 billion worth of recoverable metals were lost from in 2022 from the circular economy, and only $28 billion worth were brought back into the circular economy. That is a potential significant economic value. That's obviously global numbers. But again, it comes back to this point of not really knowing the scale of the urban mine in the UK of what is our economic value contained within these materials. And I think it's not just about economic value as well. There's also the environmental impacts of the extraction as well, and processing and the waste as well. So, without being able to make specific recommendations for incentives, incentivisation is going to be really important. The secondary market, or the market for secondary raw materials, will be really important, and so making the mechanisms to make that happen are going to be key.
Thank you. Thanks. As a sort of an independent not-for-profit, we tend not to make recommendations per se. DEFRA are one of many stakeholders that we have. I think sometimes what we talk about, how we talk about it, makes it clear where we are and what we think. And I think I'd like to put the consumer hat on in relation to what we would like to see. Because as what we've learned over the last 4 years through all the work that we've done, I'm very confident that if we have an easy, low-friction, clear, standard offer to the public around where they can easily access reuse and recycling points, then we can communicate it and we can get it, we can drive change. The problem that we've had is this, is too much friction, too much uncertainty. Options are on the table around easier retailer take-back, easier retailer delivery take-back, doorstep, curbside, and as has been rightly pointed out, they don't come for free. But what also has been rightly pointed out is that those costs are often in the system already, and that's the cost of fires, both in terms of monetary terms, in both of air pollution terms, in disruption to services and the knock-on impact of that, for example. It's £1 billion of lost value of material. That's a cost, that's a loss that's not being recovered. So there's lots of reasons to make it easier. A decision needs to be made on making it easier and where then that is distributed. But unless we make it easier, we will only end up exactly where we are now, because that's the biggest limiting factor. And also, we need to keep talking about this over and over and over again, because we live in a very busy, noisy world. Our competition for the Recycle Your Electricals campaign isn't an environmental NGO. I've said this many times. It's producers of electricals. It's Chanel. It's BMW. It's Taylor Swift. It's Spotify. We're just trying to cut through in an incredibly noisy world, hence why we've got that cat that we have, because that's what we concluded was the best way to do it. But we've got to keep talking about it, because it's the fastest growing waste stream in the world, full of valuable materials. To not be prioritising it is a failure of common sense, I guess.
So do you think the government has asked the right questions in its consultation paper?
It's asked some of them. As I said before, it's asked them in the context of it being the waste electrical regulations, not the fix the entirety of the electrical and electronic sector regulations, which don't exist. And I think that call for cross-governmental things is really important. If I go back to fast tech, if I may, that's an issue. It's not just an environmental issue. It's a restriction of hazardous substances, persistent organic pollutants, it's chemicals, it's REACH, it's VAT, it's excise, it's border control, it's the environment agencies, and to name but a few. So it's around this cross-sectorial stuff. So I think in the context of what it was looking at, it probably has asked the right majority of questions. I think we are quite rightly looking at beyond that.
Libby, do you think it's answered the right questions?
No, I think it had quite a lot of blind spots, and I think I've highlighted a lot of them, but one that they sort of is a bit surprising that they didn't ask in the context of what they were asking, because basically all that they were asking about in the consultation document itself is how can we increase the collection of electronics for recycling. It had broader questions in the call for evidence section, but in the consultation itself is how can we incentivize increased recycling? But it never asked, and I don't think this is on the radar at all, is what's the best use of these things once we collect them, in terms of incentivizing reuse. So reuse wasn't in there. And one of the things that we'd like to see them think about in future is how you can tackle the twin problems of this massive amount of digital waste that we're creating, but also at the same time we've got this really large problem of digital exclusion. And so there's an expectation that in the next less than a decade, by 2032, there's going to be 5.8 million people digitally excluded in the UK. And so these are people that although we're awash with it, they don't have the smartphones or the laptops that they need to function in a modern society. And there are community groups that are redistributing, but 68% of them say we don't have enough of these electronics to distribute. And at the same time, so many of them are going to waste. So there's a real lack of joining up policy to make sure that you're tackling both those things at the same time, which you could do if you ask the right questions.
Can I ask you about one specific topical issue at the moment, and that is the value of electric vehicles after 3 years? Because their value after 3 years, it looks very low, and if you speak to motoring organisations, I have done, they said, for crying out loud, don't buy an electric vehicle, you lease it for 3 years, because at the end of 3 years it's not going to be worth very much. And that is now recognised in the market, which is undermining the sale of electric vehicles, and they are obviously a very large item, an electrical item. What advice would you give to the legislators or regulators or indeed the manufacturers to try and encourage a boost to the second-hand value after 3 years of electric vehicles?
I know absolutely nothing about the electric vehicle market, so I would not be able to answer that. I'm sorry.
We always respect demonstrations of ignorance.
Speak to what you know.
Yes. What about you, Libby?
I have colleagues who know about the electric vehicle market, and we actually did do a report specifically on increasing the second-hand market for electric vehicles, which I'd be happy to share with the committee afterwards.
That'd be very useful.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Are you okay?
Yeah, no problem.
We've just got one quick question from Claudia Webb.
Yeah, just a very quick question. I want to just go a bit broad, and also I remember the days when we had the salesperson coming to the door and selling you the Kirby that would last for life. I still have the Kirby, but no mechanism for repairing it. But the question I wanted to ask: many African countries are used for exploitative extraction of minerals and raw materials and chemicals, and then in a parallel way dumped on in terms of electrical waste. What is your industry saying about this, and what are the challenges that we should be making to government about this?
The thing that I would say is that it was actually, I should have highlighted it in answer to the last question, it was quite surprising that there was no mention of export in either the call for evidence or the consultation document, because we know that it's a major problem. We know that it's a high risk, and I think the EAC's report the first time around did a really good job of highlighting that. So I don't know why that was an oversight, because it is such an important issue, and it is something that is desperately needed, and the recommendation that you need to make sure that you're stopping greenlighting the export of used electricals, not just waste electricals, but used electricals, which at the moment it's quite easy to mischaracterize them and or to sell them on legitimately as used electricals, but to a country that, when those electricals eventually reach the end of life, won't have the capacity to safely handle the materials. And so I think that was another shocking oversight in the consultation document, and it would be really useful to press the government to respond to your initial recommendations from the previous inquiry, which I think still stand and still need to be addressed.
In our the Electrical Waste Challenges and Opportunities report, which is the mass balance, the flow of products and waste in the system that we updated and is with the committee, that revealed an increase in illegal exports over the last 4 years to around about 180,000 tonnes now. So as much of the small electricals we're recycling, total electricals. A lot of that is bigger stuff, it's displays and other things, so it's not tending to be small electricals. And that's stuff that's getting out in very peculiar places. It's sometimes big stock sales that retailers and others are doing, and stuff is being graded, and then some of it's being sold, and then some of it's being shipped. It's linked to obviously significant disruption in border controls over the last 4 years, linked to the pandemic, of course, and Brexit too. You have an environment agency or environment agencies, like many public sector bodies, are struggling to finance the activities that they were doing before. And it's also linked to some more work that the UN have done on the amount of export. But there's, regretfully, in any waste and resources issue, there is illegality. In any sector, there's illegality. And I think it is a good point. I would agree that action needs to, more needs to be looked. The agencies are trying to do this stuff. Of course, people are trying to stop it. But what seems to be the case is that there is still too much of using that illegal route as an option. And the best thing that the public can do is get it into the right place. So get it into the local authority network, get it into the retailer, because that's where it has the least chance of essentially leaking into the wrong place. But so that's what we can do as a public, but as a system as a whole, more effort needs to go into trying to stem that flow, because it's not wanted in any way.
And Izzi, in terms of the raw materials and the exploitative extraction of those, in terms of the chemicals and minerals that are taken from countries?
Yeah, so obviously the extraction and processing of raw materials does have environmental impacts and social impacts as well, as has also already been covered. And it's really important that we are thinking about how to make that primary extraction as good for the environment as possible, and with as low social impacts as possible. And one of the ways of doing this is to be minimising the amount we are taking from as virgin materials, which is where the circular economy comes in, and this idea of if we're mining our waste, our electronic waste, for these metals, it gives us a way of diversifying some of our supply chains and an opportunity to try and reduce some of that primary extraction. I probably say we're not. It would be naive to say that we are going to ever get rid of primary extraction, but it's about trying to minimise it and do it in the best way possible. And I think I'd also like to echo the point that Libby was just making about used electrical equipment. We made a very similar point in our response as well, about the needs to make sure that this is not happening. There's plenty of evidence that shows that the improper processing of e-waste has impacts on environment and human health, so it's absolutely vital that any loopholes are closed around that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much indeed for your patience this afternoon. I'd like to thank our witnesses, Scott Butler, Libby Peake and Izzi Monk, for joining us for our second panel, and our first panellists for a really interesting session in e-waste. Thank you all very much indeed. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.